Hello and welcome to Highlights Presents the Value of MarTech Stack Planning. I'm Scott Taylor and I will be moderating today's presentation. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started here today. Our goal is to make this an interactive presentation. So if you have any questions, feel free to submit them through the GoToWebinar toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen. And then we'll carve out the last 15 minutes to answer those questions. Don't worry about taking notes. As a follow-up, we'll be sending out a recording and slide share of today's presentation, along with a summary blog post. If you want to live tweet throughout today's webinar or follow us as we live tweet, check out #highlights. And if we don't cover something today or if your question isn't answered, feel free to reach out to us at contact@heilmangroup.com. And then I wanted to introduce you to today's presenters. From the Cleveland Clinic, we have the Senior Director of Digital Operations, Scott Mowry, and Kyle Chandler, our Director of Marketing here at Heilman Group. So the structure of today's presentation, we'll be running through what is a MarTech Stack, how is the industry shifting and how has it shifted over the past few years, what's the value of planning your MarTech Stack, what goes into a MarTech Stack, and how do we structure different stacks for different priorities for your business. And then at the end, we'll summarize with key takeaways and how to get started. And then, like I said, we'll carve out the last few minutes for Q&A. So with that, I want to hand over to Kyle Chandler, and he'll get us started here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Scott. And I also want to take a quick second and thank the other Scott Mowry in the room for joining us. We really appreciate you taking your time to kind of talk through this, at least topic that I get really excited about. So thank you.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So cool. So we can dive in, starting off at the highest level. So what is a MarTech Stack? So I always feel like the best way to start with something like this is a definition. So Scott and I thought about it a little bit and tried to boil it down to what are the most important kind of components, and we kept coming back to terms like integrated or simplify or efficiencies, reporting. A lot of those things were kind of the value adds that came out of having a holistic stack, kind of thoughtfully planned stack. So really at its core, a MarTech Stack is that collection of different marketing technologies thoughtfully integrated to simplify and organize marketing operations and demand generation with a holistic goal of integrated data efficiency, process management, and full funnel reporting. So there's a lot that goes into it. And really, I promise that's the last slide that I'll read exactly off. But kind of giving a high level. From there, we boil it down to from the CMO perspective. So as the CMO is tasking their teams, where does that stack really come into play? So thinking of the two different components, kind of that demand generation and marketing ops. And when we think of marketing ops, it's more than just the idea of implementation of marketing technology from a nurture perspective, from a qualification perspective. It's really your marketing infrastructure overall. So thinking of the idea of collaboration tools, task management, things like Workfront or Teamwork, where you're organizing your full operations of your marketing team. Then on the demand generation side, where that CMO is really tasking folks with driving awareness. They're trying to fill the top of the funnel, get people to enter into your marketing programs. So with these different types of challenges kind of being tasked with the different teams, where the MarTech Stack kind of comes in, it's kind of that proverbial bridge or gap between the two systems or two organizations. So it connects not just processes, so making sure that your collaboration tool is integrated with your task management or Workfront management. It's also making sure that your data pipe, that your kind of funnel is connected to where it's sending data and activities that the demand gen team is driving, making sure that connects into your marketing automation system, making sure that integrates through to your sales or your data warehouse. So it's that bridge of just not process, but it's also the bridge of the actual technology and how it's integrated and how you can pass back that ROI or kind of performance of how it's doing. So that stack is very much many parts that kind of goes through it.
Okay. So we want to touch on a little bit on the how the industry's been for MarTech and kind of how the trends have really shifted in recent years. So, in my time at Cleveland Clinic, I've been there for over 11 years, and I've definitely seen this shift as it relates to the technology we use with our website and just in the industry, what I'm seeing out there. So, what we've seen is that, as technology has expanded further and there's more features and functionality that have been brought into the marketplace, we've definitely seen a shift where marketing, that job function takes over the ownership of the technology. It used to be where really your IT department was the sole, executor of this functionality, and really marketing was lucky to be able to touch anything with that. And that's really shifted over the past few years, and for several reasons. I think the biggest reason to me for the ownership shift has really been the standpoint of accountability. Your marketing executive leadership is looking for results. They're looking for you to report and optimize your website and the different pieces of technology you're using, whether it's to get sales or, in our case, patients, things like that. And we're really, with an IT department, a lot of times it's more of a focus on trying to get the technology in place and make sure it's working properly, but not as much time is being spent on the optimization of that functionality. So from that end, marketing is really taking on that ownership, because ultimately they're the ones who are trying to justify the investment, trying to boost the sales, customers, things of that sort. The other thing is that it really becomes this balancing of a budget and time versus the value of this technology to the business. So with the increases and improvements in marketing technology, if it can help you save time, that helps save money. It might help save resources that you need working on projects or working on your functionality. So that's something where, from a marketing side, they have to make that business case to justify that investment. And also, just with much of the marketing technology that's out there now, there's a lot that comes into play with artificial intelligence and automation as well. So if the computer or the machine can do the tasks more efficiently than what a human can, that also factors into saving time and money. So I think all those factors are things that really the marketing group is keeping a closer eye on than necessarily the IT department. They have their own function with this, and it's critical for them to be involved too, so they have a voice at the table. But the marketing team tends to be more responsible for this now because of the shift in accountability. So if we move on, what we've seen in marketing technology over the years has been a rapid expansion in terms of the number of tools that are out there. And Kyle's going to speak a little more to this later on in our presentation today, but this is some graphics that we got from chiefmartech.com, as one of the leading blogs in this industry. And it shows that the number of tools have increased almost 4,500% between 2012 to 2018. And to put this in perspective, with the 7,000 tools that are out there that are visible in 2018, that's actually more than what has been represented individually in the last 5 years combined. It's a staggering pace of where this is growing, and it doesn't appear to be slowing down anytime soon. More and more tools are entering the marketplace every day. So, the other thing that's a factor in this for why we're seeing this big growth in MarTech is that there's definitely lower barriers to entry here in terms of getting involved and having companies create this technology. And so from that end, there's a number of factors for that. The main ones to me is that from a purely development standpoint, there's a lot more resources that are available now for developers or wannabe developers to understand code, understand how to build software, things of that sort. There's also a lot of things out there now, like open source coding, where you may not necessarily be an expert developer, but you can grab a lot of the code, put it in place, and then tweak it as needed to come up with your own tool. There's also more developers that are out there in the marketplace. So if you're looking to bring on a development staff to build a new app or build some new piece of functionality, you can definitely recruit those people at a lower cost than what you could do before. And the same thing comes into place when it comes to the technology itself, the computers, servers, videos, memory, all that now is at a lower price. So there's not as much of that pain point up front of trying to make the investment in the technology. And then the last piece is also that from a financial standpoint, and we touched on this a little bit here in the slide, but there's definitely a lot more funding that's out there in the MarTech landscape. There's a lot more people, such as venture capitalists, that are looking to hop onto the next big thing. A lot of these companies will develop their own software, and you'll see this all the time in the news, that these companies are getting snatched up by Google or Amazon or others. And that makes it a very competitive area where people are trying to get and develop the next big thing. But you have all these investors that are willing to put the money up because they're looking to hit lightning in a bottle. So I think that's another piece that really has helped accelerate this market and made it more useful for the end users such as us who are using the technology.
Yeah. And then one thing to piggyback on real quick, Scott, too, I think something where the data ties into that kind of trend that we're seeing, the kind of idea of the long tail. So we know, as we saw that huge increase, every 2 years going up into this year, we're seeing kind of like that top 10%, where they list out as the billion-dollar giants. Those are staying somewhat steady, and even we've seen some consolidation actually at the high end. But where we're seeing that enormous growth is that kind of long tail niche where, like the idea of I think we were talking about voice search didn't exist 5 years ago. GDPR technology didn't exist a year ago. So that long tail keeps growing, and it's probably going to continue to grow. At some point, we'll reach consolidation. But right now, it's just there's so much out there.
Right, and to add on to that, I think there's so much more possibilities now of the long tail of technology being able to connect and plug in with existing technology. In the past, a lot of these systems really just could not talk to each other very well. Now you're finding more and more that you have those big names, like what you said, Kyle, but then you have some elements or components that you could add on to this to help make an existing product even better, or kind of give it a little bit more of a twist on what you're doing with it. And that makes a difference too. You don't have to develop the whole big piece of marketing technology. It could just be one little piece that addresses an area of need.
Yep.
So I think that's definitely helped raise that number as well. So, thinking further about this, and we move on to thinking about the value of this plan, and why plan for this? What's the result that you can get out of this? And what it comes down to for me is that the value here is that if you think about your leadership from a marketing standpoint, a lot of CMOs are really shifting more and more to thinking about measurement and being able to track the ROI and the attribution of what they're doing, to be able to justify the investments that they're doing in their technology, their campaigns, things of that sort. These are some metrics that we pulled from a study from Nielsen Company, but it's showing how 79% of CMOs, they're looking to invest more in marketing analytics and data attribution over the next year. But also, a lot of those same CMOs have very little confidence that they have the right technology in place right now to achieve their goals. So whether it be launching campaigns or be able to measure the results of what they have, they may not have as much confidence there. So that's been a bigger and bigger shift. And you're starting to see this in some industries. Social media is one like this, where when it first really exploded, there wasn't a lot of time being invested in measuring ROI. And I think now you're starting to see that shift where more and more organizations are thinking about that, or just justifying when you do your paid campaigns, what are you getting for these results? If you're doing things like automated testing on your website, the end result is you're hoping to get more out of this in terms of sales and customers. So the CMO is really helping to drive this, and they're looking for the technology that will help them measure their results more accurately. So as you start to think further about the MarTech stack and kind of how this all works together, it really comes down to how you get your data to work in a couple different ways, and how it's set to work together. So this is an example of one type of a marketing technology stack. We're going to show you some other ones later in our presentation. But what we liked about this is an example that Heilman Group has done with theirs, and Kyle's going to jump in on this in a second. But I do like how this touches on a couple aspects of planning for this. It's important for you to think about your MarTech stack in terms of your marketing funnel. So your work that you're doing at the top of your funnel about building awareness, going into getting sales and conversions in the middle, or people doing research, and then ultimately the bottom of the funnel of getting those conversions. There's different pieces of technology that will touch each of those areas, and it's important to think, evaluate the whole funnel for your organization and see what are the pieces that we have there to help drive value through that. This also is set up where the various pieces of MarTech are arranged by various job functions within an organization. So whether this is in an agency like Heilman Group or at the Cleveland Clinic, we have a lot of different departments that will do different aspects of marketing. So whether it's advertising or social or data analytics or event marketing, they all have pieces of technology that can help the individuals do their job. And then the last piece of this is that the functionality does not exist in silos. A lot of this functionality will definitely overlap and interact with each of these different functions. In this example, Marketo is a good choice for this. Marketo touches all these different areas in one way or another. And it may be really kind of the backbone of the marketing technology stack, so it gets all these pieces of functionality to work well together. But it's important to think about that. What pieces do you have now that maybe tie into others, and also which ones don't tie in, so that if there's a better way to make an integration here that helps you get more out of your technology, that you can use that. Kyle, anything you want to add on to this?
Yeah. I mean, really, this kind of model, I kind of think of it mentally as kind of a data pipe model. So as Scott said, as we get later into the presentation, we go through a few different other scenarios, whether it, data pipe, kind of a mental mapping, a themes type approach. So this kind of goes with that pipe. So things that you see here, you won't see necessarily our collaboration tools that we use. You won't necessarily see some of our infrastructure management tools. This is much more tied to where's that system of record. Obviously in here, Marketo's that system of record. That could be swapped out with anything. So, it's not saying Marketo's the end all be all, but maybe that's another marketing automation platform like a HubSpot, or for an organization, it might be their CRM system or their data warehouse. But the kind of idea of like, what's the hub and system of truth that brings that data together? And then from there, kind of how are we bringing the data through? So where is the data coming in? Where are we pulling it? Where are we passing data? So for us, that's very much the model that we use as we kind of lay out our demand gen process. But there's a lot of other different ways. So kind of just a starter as we get into some of the nitty gritty details, ways that you can mentally start organizing some of the 7,000 different tools you can use out there.
Right. We'll try not to get to 7,000 tools, but it's good to have some tools that help you do your job. So what we also looked at with this technology is how these pieces can connect together, like I mentioned earlier. And the reason why you want to be able to have these tools connect to each other and be able to talk to each other is it helps you do a better job of identifying your buyer's customer journey. So in this example here, this is a graph that's pulled from data that you can get in Marketo and a tool called the Opportunity Influence Analyzer. But what it allows you to do is that if you start to think about how you can connect your different pieces of MarTech together, it lets you kind of string together the whole journey. So if I look at this here, I can see at the beginning of this that I'm creating a lead, and I'm using something like our Google Analytics platform to identify a traffic source, what type of advertising medium are we using. And then I can look at it further of, engaging with a product or pricing or a blog on a website. So that can tie in our content management system. It could tie in our WordPress blog. Being able to have that all feed into our analytics can help tie that string together. Watching a video, you want to make sure that your video platform works with the other pieces and plays nice. Even things like online tools or form entries here. So, entering into a nurture stream through a marketing automation tool, doing social media, and then even maybe taking it offline to something like your call center. So people who are calling in to place an order or request an appointment, things like that. But ultimately what this could do is, if you get your technology to talk to each other, is it really helps show the whole journey. You can piece these things together and you don't have these black holes where a user's progressing along through your funnel, then all of a sudden they vanish and you can't tell what they're doing. And then somehow they may come back later and you can't continue tracking the whole string. So, your technology does need to work together. I think that's one of the biggest things I can take or share with this is that you do want to make sure that these areas are connected and not off in silos. So, the overall value I'd say for MarTech Stack planning is that, we've mentioned how it can save time and money. It also can reduce technical debt. So technical debt, for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, is basically when you're investing in technology and it's working for you, but then it also has drawbacks to it that could cost you more time and energy and development work in terms of fixing it later to make it work. That's really important. If you're not planning for that front, you could be saddled with something that could take years to resolve. And I can give an example of that from my experience at Cleveland Clinic, that in the past we had used a form tool and an email tool together as part of our lead generation campaigns. They were separate pieces of technology, and although we could pass the data from the form tool to the email tool, it wasn't set up to work very cleanly. And we had worked with Heilman Group, and they did a good job of connecting as best they could. But what we found was that we had to invest a lot of time, a lot of money to make customizations for various landing pages, follow-up emails, things like that, that really using a tool like a Marketo or a HubSpot or something up front could have saved us a lot of time, money, and aggravation. So we eventually made that switch to make that work, and it really has just been way more efficient for us. What I'd also add is that the value of the MarTech Stack planning is it definitely gives you the ability to then go to your chief marketing officer, your CFO, even your CEO, and make that ask to continue to improve your technology. So to point out, is there a deficiency here, or is there a need that's not being met that we could meet with better technology, or here's the return that we get on. It's not just your CFO saying, oh, this is another line item in the budget, but you're able to show that return, the payoff that you can get from this. We were able to show that with the investment we made in Marketo, that it just saved us time and money, but it also helped us drive more people through our marketing funnel. It was a very easy ask for us to make. The last thing with the value of the MarTech Stack planning is to lay out a roadmap for this. You can't address all of this at the same time. You kind of have to pick and choose your battles and then kind of put together a comprehensive plan. It might be over several years, but you work towards developing that final set of tools.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll piggyback on too, kind of tied to that idea of kind of time and value, kind of the handoff. I know we've even evaluated processes that we do at Highland Group where, we kind of do the handoff of, hey, if we invest in this technology, we did it probably about 2 years ago when we invested in digital dashboarding. The idea of like, hey, if our analysts are spending, I'll make up the number, 10 hours to dashboard and come up with these things manually, and we can invest in a digital dashboard that cuts their time down to an hour, we have this much, they have 8 hours back in their day that they can do higher value, thoughtful things. So when you think of not just from how much time do you get back, but how much time does your team begin to get to do more strategic, higher value things. So that nice balance.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to turn over to Kyle to talk further about the components of the MarTech Stack.
Cool. So so this is our eye chart here. So when Scott touched on the 7,000 different technologies that were included from Chief MarTech, this is that chart, that tough to read chart. So it's crazy. I think one of the biggest areas that they said where they had growth in this was they saw a brand new category being created for data regulation. So everything that came out with GDPR, a whole new technology category was created. And then also the aspect of chatbots, sales automation, and AI is probably one of the quickest growing. So outside of all the other tools out there, email, marketing automation. So we'll kind of hop to our next slide where it kind of boils into a little bit more detail.
One thing I would just add to this is just saying when you see this whole stack, this can be very overwhelming. Keep in mind that organizations don't have to have all of this, not saying all 7,000 pieces, but even all the different functions that are in here. You want to be able to develop a stack that's appropriate for your business. Not all pieces of MarTech are appropriate for every type of business. Some of them may just not be a good fit for your business, and that's okay. But it's thinking through what is really critical for what I can do, what would make a difference with my users, my customers. That's how you should really think of this.
Yep, absolutely. And to kind of pair off that, so this is kind of taking more of a literal translation of the big NASCAR logo slide. So knowing that there's about 6 main categories that's organized out there, and then of that there's 50 subcategories, or a little bit over 50 subcategories. So as Scott was saying, this is daunting. When you look at it, it's I have 10 different things that I think of, from data management, data organization. There could be, 6 different, sub-segments that I could think about of how do I manage the work that I'm doing. So there's a lot out there. So the idea that we always talk about is the idea of building that roadmap. So when you start looking through and building that, we always say kind of start with the end in mind. So to quote Covey, think about what your main goals, what your main measures are, and really start beginning to prioritize. So thinking of the mission critical, what do we have to be able to measure our success? Is that an analytics? Is that do we need a data hub? But what's mission critical to report on what's successful? Then we start getting into the nice to haves. Hey, what could add value, but it's starting to add on our kind of main goal. And then finally the wish list. And that wish list is a balance. So there's a lot of people out there that talk about the idea of the shiny object syndrome, where, you know, a new cool piece of technology is out there. You just kind of want to get it, play around with it, see how it works. So that balance of, you know, not hopping on every single new technology and really kind of keeping yourself kind of accountable to, do I need this? Is this mission critical of my goals? How will this lever us up? How will this improve us? So starting with that roadmap, as we get to the end, Scott's going to kind of walk us through how he's working on it currently with the Cleveland Clinic. But for the first one, we wanted to share how we've kind of done it with Heinlein Group as well. So we've been kind of on our 3-year plan. So, you know, from that roadmap, you can see it wasn't a 6-month plan or a 9-month plan or 12-month. We've been kind of working through it over the course of the last 3 years. So as we started in, it was actually late 2015, with our kind of initiative of kind of eating our own dog food and doing our marketing, we started with this kind of 3-year plan. Excuse me. And you can see we kind of highlighted each area, so year 1 being in blue. So for us, our first thing was we need a system of record, and we need to start filling the funnel. We just want we need a lot more people to know who we are. And we want a lot of people to kind of get the word out. So for us, we started off with a few systems. You know, we released our new website onto, content management system with Kentico. We invested in Marketo for our marketing automation system. We've been using Moz for our SEO management for our clients for a long time. We started doing that for ourselves, bringing in things for our analytics and attribution. So bringing in Google Analytics and creating a more formal process of how we integrate that with our advertising technology of WordStream and a few different other tools. From a collaboration and project management, rolling in Slack and bringing in ConnectWise that helps us manage everything. So just kind of laying the groundwork of what we need to be able to measure and execute. Here's the baseline of what we have to implement to be able to achieve those two things. So as we got that groundwork, we started elevating to the next level. So orange being year 2 of, well, how do we get more people? For us, it was how do we get more people to engage middle of the funnel? How do we get them to take bigger actions outside of just downloading a piece of content? So we started rolling in our webinar program. So obviously you attending today. So integrating a GoToWebinar, bringing in an advocacy program. So we have an employee advocacy program through Octopus where all of our employees can share content on behalf of the company. Bringing in interactive content like quizzes and an assessment, optimizations and personalizations. So we use a tool called Bright Info where we can do live dynamic personalization content suggestions on our website. We moved to digital dashboards, data enhancement, so pulling in different data providers that can append and enrich data, and just continue to grow on that. Video advertising, so investing in a true CDN with Wistia, where we can do more. So building on all those things where in our first year it would have been impossible for us to tackle all that. Then as moving into year 3, we're looking to invest in sales automation. Bots and live chat, we just moved forward with, with our Drift partnership and bringing in ABM from Marketo. So slowly starting to build on it. We're adding to it where it's tying back to our goals. So it's a progression. So it's not something that you're going to achieve in 1 year. It's kind of a grow. And there's some stuff that you may invest in, and after a year, if it's not showing its worth, you peel it back off and take a look at the next thing. So really having that guiding force, kind of that roadmap approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd also just add that with the elements that we're seeing here for year 1 versus year 2, year 3, is that once you're done with year 1, you're not necessarily forgetting about year 1. Like you still have to keep in mind thinking, how do I make this better? How do I use that tool and get more out of what I have there in my investment? So it's not, talking about the shiny object syndrome. It's not totally ignoring that and moving on to the next great thing. It's saying, hey, how do my existing tools then become integrated with maybe new tools that I add on year 2 or year 3, but then also with just the tools I have from the get-go, how do I continue to get more out of those tools?
Absolutely. And then on that note of integration, so we thought we couldn't have a MarTech webinar without talking about integrations. We kind of broke out the three main ones and tried to plot it on the concept of implementation difficulty as well as implementation cost. So knowing kind of the three different buckets, the idea of native integrations, middleware, and custom integrations. On the lower end, or from a ease of implementation and lower cost, is the idea of native integrations. So we're seeing this grow more and more and more. So the idea of being able to integrate your webinar software into your marketing automation program is becoming far easier. It's almost as simple as being able to log in and use a username and password lets those two systems work together. So the idea of having a more non-tech savvy user being able to integrate these things, think kind of plug and play, or the idea of point and shoot. It's a lot easier. There's typically minimal investment from a time standpoint, and a lot of these companies are including native integrations out of the box as part of the software you're buying. As you kind of progress up the line, getting into middleware, so this is where you typically see parties like Zapier or Bedrock or MuleSoft, where there isn't a native integration, but you're not quite ready to bite off a full custom API, custom integration, where you can use one of their tools to kind of to allow your two different systems to talk. So, for instance, say maybe you have a HubSpot account and a data warehouse, and you want to make sure that your data from HubSpot is being piped over into your data warehouse on a daily basis. You can use a middleware provider like a Zapier, where you can once again connect with relatively low tech savviness, connect the two different systems, use their kind of drag and drop editor, say, here's how I want the data to be passed, here's the transformations, and then you can schedule the reoccurrence of it. So it requires a little bit more from a technical standpoint of how to do it. It still is not a programmer or developer doing this, but a little bit more tech savvy. And then with that comes some added cost. So when you're using Zapier or Bedrock, you then get a monthly subscription cost. So depending on your bandwidth and usage of the tools, that may vary, but that's kind of that next step. You're not quite investing in a custom solution, but you're now tacking on a monthly cost, a monthly subscription with it. And then finally, on the top end, your custom integrations. This is the one where it's typically going to require the most upfront cost, and typically is going to be the hardest to implement. So for this, thinking kind of custom and complex. So this is where you're typically leveraging APIs of systems. So you're using the API to pull data out of a system, do transformations, and then push it into another system. That is typically, from a cost perspective, that's that upfront cost where you're bringing in a development team or an agency to go ahead and build those solutions and implement. Now, the ongoing cost may not be that high. There may be some maintenance where a new API is released or there's a new part of the tool that you need to update. But typically speaking, it's more so the cost is the upfront cost. So those are kind of the three different tiers that we typically see. And as you're going through and building your stack, taking a look at, hey, if I can get 50 to 60% of my integrations done with a native integration, now you're only looking at a smaller percentage where you may need to think of how do I do this from a middleware or a custom integration approach. So with that, we're getting into our one of our final sections here. So the idea of different stacks for different priorities. In this, we really went ahead and pulled together. We kind of grouped together kind of three different concepts, so different formats. So a lot of times when we see people beginning their planning for their MarTech stack, it really falls in one of these three. So the first one is kind of the idea of mental or relationship or kind of relational maps. So grouping similar functions, technology, themes, service areas, kind of grouping and planning along that path. We've seen others kind of go down that marketing funnel path. So what we saw for the Heinlein Group organization, so aligning to phases in the marketing funnel, and then that data pipeline. So showing literally, hey, as people come in from anonymous to known and progress all the way through to a customer, how is that data being sent from each piece throughout? So we've kind of seen generally those three groups as we go through. So with that, we pulled together 5 examples of some really thoughtful MarTech plans that we kind of want to walk through, some pros and cons, what we liked about them, where we thought they were successful.
Yeah, and as we go through these, in case you're wondering like where these are from or where can I see more of these, we pulled some of these examples from chiefmartech.com. They do an annual competition called the Stackies, which is more of competition to show visually what your marketing technology stack is like. And while you don't have to have a marketing technology stack all laid out by a designer, even having it, when I first started doing this exercise, I was just logging it in a spreadsheet. But there are some benefits to having a visual representation of this to show how the technology works with different areas. In this example with Cisco, one of the things I liked in this is how this visualization touches on a couple things. It groups some job functions together. So at the bottom, like the 6 o'clock position on this wheel, you'll see a whole section dedicated to data and operations. And different subsets of that, you'll see it's broken down that way also. But then this also touches on the types of users that they connect with. So Cisco does B2B work and B2C work. So this touches on not only their customers, but also partners that they work with and sellers. So, I do like how it does differentiate this and break it apart into different areas. And then also the functions that you see at around about the 1 o'clock position of, I renew, I install and use, I shop and buy, I'm aware. It shows how these different pieces will touch on that too. So I just thought it was kind of interesting to show how it breaks it down a couple different ways. If we move on to the next area, this is one from Informatica. This is one that talks about data, and we have 2 kind of data pipe examples. This is more about really just your marketing data and how it works through the stack. And Kyle and I thought it was interesting because it shows the whole stream from the beginning of paid and earned media, going through your website, and then going into each of these areas. And this is from, I think, their 2018 Stackies they did. But it shows whether it's your CRM with Salesforce or marketing automation with Marketo. It shows how those are connected, how there's some synchronization that's going on between the tools, so they're both having the same kind of data, and then showing the back and forth between different tools of how it works during the process of moving the data and then eventually moving it to a data warehouse, and then touching on it further for data visualization and reporting and dashboards through a tool like Tableau. Anything you want to add on this one? Or?
Yeah, no, I think you hit on it nicely. And actually, there's some similarities. This one, the next one we have up, I liked how they started to bring in, this is a little bit more relevant on the B2B side, where they start bringing in the concept of ownership at that point in time. So when they're delineating the idea of sales ownership versus when it's marketing ownership. So kind of knowing when you think of sales and marketing alignment, the idea of who's actively engaging with that prospect.
Yeah, and one other thing I like with this too, when it talks about the data from an analytics standpoint, is it's differentiating between the sales lead data where you have the name and the personal information on the user, and then also the anonymous data. So things like Adobe Analytics or Google Analytics, where we don't have the PII information, but in your CRM, you do have information like that, and showing how they can be very distinct, but they both can get fed into the same data warehouse at the end of the process.
Yep.
So if we move on to the next one, this is an example from Ion Interactive. I think this is when we're talking about the marketing funnel.
Yeah. I really like this one, aligning to that marketing funnel and even bringing in some of the data pipe concepts as well. So I liked it because I kept it very clean and concise of their different marketing phases. So going through the idea of attract, educate, match, package, transact, and advocacy. And walking through, once again, not only system ownership of what tool is owning the data at that point in time. So at attract and educate, or really attract holistically, we see the Ion Interactive, their actual tool that they sell, is that system of record and attract. So although they're driving all these different marketing channels to drive to it, Ion's tool is that system of record. From there, you can see where other systems start picking up. So as you get into educate and match, you can see that, where Pardot starts taking a play and where Salesforce starts taking a play. So I really liked how they kind of progressed through. They showed when it switched from marketing ownership to sales ownership, and same idea of when it goes from prospect to customer. So it gives that full path of kind of what's that system of record, as well as what team is kind of owning that.
Right.
So.
Okay. And then if we move on, this next one is from a company called Element 3. And I like this for a couple of reasons. One is that I would never be able to show this kind of visualization in a healthcare organization showing popcorn and nachos and soft drinks. But what I do like in it is the visual representation of showing, with the different pieces of technology that you have at your disposal, how much of an investment of time is being used in these. So, I can have a slide that would be the NASCAR slide of all these logos, but it doesn't give me context as to, do you use HubSpot a lot more than DocuSign? Do you use Google AdWords as much as you use SEMrush? So this helps give a little bit of comparison and contrast here. I like how it's grouped into different functions also, and just talking about not just saying analytics, but just saying how they can generate a lead or security. But I think that differentiation on the amount of time, or it could be your budget, or it could be the number of people in your organization who actively use these tools, I think that's an important piece that a lot of these stacks are usually lacking. So you can see, is there a piece of functionality I have that's really underutilized, where maybe it would be good to get more out of it, or it could be something where I might have multiple tools that do the same thing, and I find two of those tools I spend all my time in, and the other one I don't. What does that one tool have that is really critical to keeping it? It might just be that the other two tools will cover what you need, and you spend your time there, so maybe you can cut loose the other one and save your organization some money and resources. Okay.
And then our last one, this one's probably the most simplistic of all of them. So this is a little bit smaller of an organization, but this is a pure kind of data pipe approach. So as you can see, the arrows are letting you know where that data is coming in, and at what point in time is that source of truth. So the idea of using segment as their primary intake, normalization, kind of data validation, bringing in Clearbit to do their data append, autopilot's their marketing automation system. So you can kind of see where they're kind of progressing through that data pipe, while at the same time intercom, intercom, which is their phone call intake, is coming in using Zapier as middleware, bringing that into autopilot. And then in turn, their main hub is being Salesforce, so their CRM. So from there, they obviously have some other tools where they're pushing data out for analysis, different kind of measurement, but they're also bringing in information from their sales automation tool with SalesLoft, and call rails, their call tracking. So a very kind of true blue data pipe approach of, here's the different tools we use to drive integration and measurement.
So, I think we'll kind of bring this home with talking about some takeaways from today, and then how you can get started with, developing your own MarTech stack. From our standpoint, the key takeaways here, starting first here, is that building this comprehensive MarTech stack is not an overnight process. It's not even a one-year process. This is an ongoing piece of strategy in your marketing organization to think about, what are the pieces of technology I need to be successful in what I'm doing? How do I get my technology to work together? It's really critical to build that roadmap and just start small and kind of build up as you go here.
Yeah, as we get to the next one, when building your stack, start with the why. So when you're doing your planning, align to your strategy. So think of the questions that you're kind of challenging yourself with, or your CMO is challenging you with. Do you need greater utilization of our tool? Do you need increased data transparency? Is it driving to hit lead volume or sales quota? Think of that as you're building your stack. What tools or processes help solve those pain points?
Yeah. And then I think as you're starting to build the stack, again, we want to be aware of that shiny object syndrome. It's not that all technology is bad or some are better than others, but it's just thinking you want to make sure that you're matching up and aligning your technology choices with the needs of your business. If it doesn't make sense, even if everybody else is doing it, it doesn't necessarily mean it's right for your organization. So you need to think through the use cases. How is this going to benefit me? How is it going to benefit my customers, my users? That will help guide your decision as to what you're adding to your stack.
And then for number 4, bring in all your stakeholders and consider everyone impacted by the decision. So depending on the size of your organization, that can mean 3 people, it can mean 30 people. So, if it's bringing in marketing, if it's bringing in sales, if it's bringing in your C-suite or your kind of corporate sponsor, or is it even different departments depending on the size? So make sure as you're doing your planning and defining that, make sure you have the right people in the room, as other people will be on the other end of that implementation or plan.
Yeah. And then the last piece is that as you're developing your MarTech stack and you're looking at new pieces of technology to bring onto your organization, think about the total cost of ownership. And then it's not just, when you're planning your budget, it's not just the dollars to buy the software to, put it on your system. You need to think about what is the integration cost here? What is the opportunity cost that if you use this functionality that maybe I can't do this other piece of functionality, which might give me more return on my investment? But also, taking into account training is important. All these tools that you add, you still have to have humans who are going to interact with the tools. It doesn't do everything by itself. So even something like a marketing automation tool like Marketo, while we'll do a lot of the tasks, you still have to have people that know how to use the tool to build it and get it to work properly and maintain it in case something goes awry. So that's really important. I think a lot of people don't take that into account. They just think adding technology helps reduce my headcount, and that's not always the case. Sometimes you may have to add a little, but it helps to get the most out of that tool. And then the last piece is really thinking about maintenance also for these tools. So, do you have to upgrade your tool over time? Do you have to add on other pieces to make it work better to meet your needs? One example that I know I had happen personally at Cleveland Clinic was we had some business owners that a couple of years ago, they were interested in developing their own mobile app for a certain piece of functionality in our organization. And what they didn't take into account when we talked to them was saying, yeah, it's great. Here's the cost for building an iOS app, and we can go from there. But then it was talking further to say, well, did you consider developing an Android app? Because there's more Android users that are out there. Our audience is not just iPhone users. And then taking it further to think about, well, what happens when the iPhone then went from like an iPhone 8 to an iPhone 10? That requires different functionality. Your app could become obsolete or eventually would have to be shut down because it just wouldn't work on a newer version of a phone. So people need to take that into account. Again, roadmap that out to say, what does our cost potentially look like over the next few years? So you're not stuck with a piece of technology that's not going to serve your purposes. So, in terms of getting started, think about how do you approach this. I started talking about this with Kyle a little while back because we're going through this process now with different departments and stakeholders in our organization at the clinic and different marketing areas. But we've all been working together to try to identify the various functions in your business. That's kind of the first place to start, just to see who you need to talk to find out the technology that we're using. And I like to think about it in terms of mapping these, we call it micro moments. This is a term that Google's developed in the past about moments where your customers are making decisions to consider you or to make a decision on a specific task. But you're trying to think about the user journey and how these tools can be applied in those various moments. So things like doing paid advertising. Do you have an advertising platform that comes in to attract a user? Or we have our tools like for measurement, things like that. But then it's also connecting with the various stakeholders in your organization for feedback. So when I started this process, I brainstormed and came up with an initial list on my own of items. And this visualization here, this doesn't cover everything that we have at Cleveland Clinic, but it does cover a lot of areas. But my initial list, I came up with a pretty broad list, I thought, and then I sent it out to various departments in our marketing division. And the feedback I got from them of like, hey, here are the things that you're missing that we need to add to this list was substantial. There were a lot of things where I didn't know what the software was or the tool, and it's been a real educational experience, but it's important to get other stakeholders to help define the stack. This should not be a one-person show of trying to define this. And then trying to identify the functions that apply to your MarTech. In our case, these are the 5 areas we came up with of collaborate, create, attract, deliver, and measure. We thought it kind of touched on the marketing funnel, but also the collaboration part is really critical. In our organization, we have multiple teams that really work on our projects together. It's not usually one group that does a project. So collaboration is critical for our success. So that was almost first and foremost for us, but then it's how do we create content of various forms? How do we get people to see the content? How do we then deliver information to people? And then measuring the whole thing comes into play too, whether it's our data warehouse or web analytics and other research tools. And then the other piece of this is that as you identify the different functions and the marketing technology tools is Also define the owners of these different pieces of MarTech too, so that if you have let's say you're considering a new piece of software, and I might find out that this piece of software has an interesting integration with WordPress, I can then go to our person who owns our setup of WordPress and bring them into the conversation. Because the last thing you want to do is, invest in some technology and then find out later that you have these key pieces of MarTech where it's just not going to work with it. And then you're stuck holding this tool that you're just not getting your full investment for. So I think with that, I think we covered. Anything you want to add before we go to questions?
Yeah, no, I thought you hit it really nicely, and I think it kind of brings it kind of full circle of, as we walk through other examples, kind of a process to get started, inventory where you're at, and then start building that plan, who's involved, what's involved, to get to where you want to go. So, yeah, so with that, I think we can open it up to questions. So I'll throw it over to Scott on some of those questions, or Scott Taylor, the other Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Scott and Kyle. Awesome job tackling this complex topic here. So I guess with the first question here that we got, we hear a lot of buzzwords as marketers. So what's the difference between MarTech and ad tech, and then how does that impact your planning approach?
Okay, I can start on this one, and Kyle, feel free to jump in. The way I distinguish this is that ad tech, the way I've seen in the past, really talks about advertising technology. It tends to be software components that are typically used by agencies, I think, to help your team do the work you're doing. So something like maybe Google AdWords would be considered a piece of advertising technology. MarTech a lot of times is defined more as like the tools that the business is using to do their job, like your content management system or your web analytics tool, things like that. To me, I think they kind of all go together. Advertising is a function of marketing. You could have, if you really want to get granular, you could have sales tech and other areas of marketing, but I think that's where, when you break it down by the functions, you can help distinguish that. So in our area, the attract piece that I showed earlier, that touches on a lot of what would be commonly referred to as ad tech or advertising technology of like Google AdWords, Bing ads, Facebook ads, things of that sort.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, when we think of ad tech, we think of, where you have those two groups, kind of demand gen and marketing ops. We see the demand gen, people filling the top of the funnel using those advertising technologies. But I think the kind of approach and thought process still holds steady of, if you can integrate that and have that data pass through, so what's coming from your advertising into your marketing ops or your kind of marketing hub, what can come back from your data warehouse or your CRM system. Having that integrated just gives you greater reporting clarity. When your CFO or CMO asks for what is your ROI, it gives you that clarity. So
great, thanks guys. Next question here. We talked a little bit about growth over the last few years, but what are your predictions moving forward into the next 2 to 3 years? What areas of MarTech do you see as kind of growth areas?
Well, I would say that the chart we showed of the growth of the amount of tools, I don't think that's slowing down at all. That's going to get that slope is going to get steeper and steeper as we go. I do think there's a lot of growth potential, at least what I'm seeing and hearing, related to things with artificial intelligence, automation, but really that the artificial intelligence has been a big one. Machine learning has come up more and more. I think voice is another area that touches on a lot of areas. It can be things as simple as search. It can be having new, Alexa skills, things like that, and thinking about how voice is going to be integrated with technology. So having voice tools that could be in things like wearables, or voice tools, you're seeing more and more of that like in your car now. I think you're going to see a lot in those areas in particular in the years ahead.
Yeah, no, I would agree. AI and machine learning, I think that's an area that's drastically growing, not just from an automation, but content personalization, the idea of serving up the right information to the right person at the right time. That's going to continue to grow. And on my end, I wouldn't be surprised if we started seeing some consolidation or more consolidation on the higher ends. So where you're seeing the bigger, Salesforce, it's been a year since they bought a company, so they're probably due soon to buy someone else. Adobe buying Marketo.
Right, that's a good example recently.
I think there's going to be consolidation as CMS providers are starting to serve up more marketing tools, and marketing tools are starting to serve up more content hosting tools. That space is going to get clouded fast, but even with that consolidation, that long tail of those niche, that's just not going to stop.
Right.
So.
I agree.
Great. So last question here. So there's over 7,000 options out there. If you could pick one piece to kind of have in your toolkit, what would it be?
Yeah. From my end, the one I always go back to is having a web analytics tool. I just feel like if you don't have that rudder to steer your marketing team's course, then you're kind of lost. You need to be able to measure what you're doing, and it may not, a tool like a Google Analytics, it may not catch everything that you need, or other tools, Adobe Analytics or whatever, but you do need to have some mechanism that can measure the results of what you're doing in your marketing efforts. And then from there, it can help and give you decisions to act on, to maybe hopefully consider other pieces of technology to add to the one-piece stack. So.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that. From a measurement perspective, it's always most important. I guess it's a little bit of cheating, but saying a marketing automation system that has web analytics in it, maybe. But some of those out there where they give you a little bit of both, but it's a little bit of cheating there, though.
Yeah, it'll give you some of the pieces, and you can always tweak it later. But that's a good point, because it does tie different pieces or functions together into one approach.
Yeah,
great. So if we're looking for any more information on MarTech, where do you guys think or encourage our audience to look?
Chief MarTech's got tons of information out there. There's a lot of other vendors out there, who are just in the space that like to talk about it. The Marketos, the HubSpots, the Salesforces. I don't know, Scott, if you got any.
I look a lot on Twitter. I'm a big fan of different things in technology or different aspects of marketing, just to go on there. I like to look at different hashtags related to MarTech. You'll see different examples of this. There's one about MarTech Advisor, I think is one that's out there that is a good one. But a lot of times I think there you can find those subject matter experts that are getting into discussion there, showing the latest news, blog posts, things like that, where then you can start to digest all this information at your own pace.
Great. So first, I just want to thank Scott for taking the time to come in and share your thoughts on this. Kyle, thanks for your insights as well.
Thank you.
And just to reiterate, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with the recording of today's presentation if you didn't have a chance to take down all the notes. And then we'll also have a follow-up blog post coming out summarizing the Q&A portion along with a link to the recording. So again, thank you guys for your time today, and thanks everyone for attending. Happy marketing.